I'm very fortunate to have Ben Reid, who's a director at Ian Reid Vendor Advocacy. Ben, thanks for joining us. And mate, can you please spend a couple of minutes telling us a little bit about yourself and what your business does?
Yeah, g'day, Matt. So we run a vendor advocacy and buyer advocacy company, which means that we assist home sellers to choose the very best agent, the strategy to assist them in getting the very best price for their property if they're on the selling side of things, and for buyers, investors or home buyers that are out there in the marketplace, we're out there sourcing properties, negotiating, researching, and making sure that they're getting the best value for their money.
Now, mate, Melbourne property is your bread and butter, but it always seems to pop up, in the headlines with very different information, very different opinions. Can you tell us what you've seen during the COVID-19 crisis and where you think it might head afterwards and some trends that will likely appear?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's been some pretty drastic headlines of drops in prices of 30% and all that type of thing. Look, this is an over exaggeration. Certainly, we've been affected, and property prices have come off a little bit. By and large, they're anywhere between 5% and 10% at the top end. And the volume of stock is probably the greatest effect that there's been. We're currently dealing with anywhere between a drop of 30 and 40% in the marketplace at the moment. CoreLogic last month for April put out their stats, and there was a 30% drop or thereabouts in turnover for the month of April. So, I mean, what that does is it keeps the supply and demand factor pretty equal. That we have had a bit of a drop in price, but the volume of vendors that have come out of the marketplace is relative to the amount of buyers that have come out of the marketplace. So it's by and large remained pretty stable, all things considered.
So, do you think that the drop in sellers in the market has anything to do with the no inspections changes that happened over Easter?
I think that the drop in sellers probably happened prior to them enacting the no inspections, prior to Easter. There are a lot of campaigns that when the COVID-19 really started to kick in, vendors who didn't have a high level of urgency thought, well, we'll just wait and see and see what happens in the marketplace. I think probably about 30% of sellers that were planning to hit the market at that point in time decided they'll just put things on hold. Um, as as the restrictions started to get tougher, there were more and more vendors that said, "Well, we'll just put the brakes on." But since Easter, and they did their backflip on the inspections on owner-occupied properties and tenanted properties, we've actually seen a notable increase, particularly in the amount of buyers that are coming back into the marketplace. We've had, on average, about 3 to 4 times more inspections on properties, and in our buyer advocacy business, finding that we're now having to compete with buyers, whereas 2 to 3 weeks ago, we were basically the only negotiators on a property. So we're now going to start to see that flow on of confidence coming back into the selling side of things, and I'd expect stock levels to start to pick up.
So, just to clarify, you mentioned that there was a backflip on those changes. As a seller or a purchaser, what can I expect with the COVID-19 changes right now?
Yeah. So about a month ago, or just over 5 or 6 weeks ago, they put a ban on open for inspections and public auctions, then just allowing private inspections on a one-to-one basis. Over the Easter period, the state government, and the only state to enact these rules was the Victorian government. They put a complete ban on owner-occupied properties and tenanted properties for any kind of inspections. That only lasted 3 days, thankfully. So it's now gone back to a one-on-one inspection basis, so agents can get buyers through, but just one at a time.
So sanity did prevail.
Yeah,
Mate,
correct.
mate, I've just had a question come through, and it's a great question. Right now, should I be buying, holding, or selling my property?
Well, it all depends on what you own, what you're planning on buying, or and your personal circumstances. This is a fantastic marketplace at the moment for upsizers because property prices have come off just a little bit, and there is an opportunity when you're selling your property, still to maximise your price and to be able to achieve a price not far from the top of the market. But if we're looking at prices that were around 1.5 million, or if we keep going down the scale to $1 million, the difference between what you're selling at the lower end of the price bracket and what you're buying into, that gap has gotten smaller. So for buyers upsizing in this current marketplace, it's fantastic because you can either get what you're after for less money, or you can go that next level up and get a slightly superior property within your budget right now. So I think it's a fantastic time for upsizers to be potentially selling and buying. Downsizers on the flip side, it's not so good for them. The downsizers, if you're in a position to hold at the moment, I would probably be holding. And any investors in the marketplace that are thinking of purchasing something, I wouldn't be worried about the A-class stock dropping off price-wise. And I think there's an opportunity right now to be getting into the marketplace and buying.
So what I'm hearing is that the natural order of the really good stock will probably maintain its position. The B-grade stock might drop a little bit, and the C-grade stock is probably where we're going to have a lot of issues. Just while we're waiting for Ben to return, we're having a few technical issues. Having a quick chat with Ben earlier, he mentioned that some of the really good opportunities in the market are at that higher end, where potentially people might be looking to upsize. And so in layman's terms, that's where you have your place, but you're looking to purchase something that's a little bit larger. And that's likely to have come off by, 5 or 10%, which is going to be a higher dollar figure than you selling on your current place. One of the other questions that I covered off with Ben just before we went to air was how the apartment market was coping compared to the suburban and inner suburban housing markets. And what Ben mentioned was that the lack of or the increased vacancy in the apartment market is causing some issues. And I'll just welcome Ben. I'll welcome Ben back in, mate. Great to have you back in.
Sorry about that, mate. A phone call come through, so I think it cut us off.
We'll learn for next time that do not disturb button is a good outcome. Mate, I was just in the segue, I was just leading through to some thoughts on the apartment market and how that's comparing. I sort of briefly mentioned that the vacancy rates are likely causing some issues, but would love to get your expert opinion on how that's playing out.
Yeah. So the apartment market compared to the housing market has always underperformed. And one of the biggest driving factors of capital gains in Melbourne in particular is supply and demand. And the pure supply of apartments in Melbourne compared to the housing is much higher. And in turn, I read a stat the other day that the greatest jump in vacancy rates is in the CBD that's happened over the course of the last 4 weeks. They've seen a rise of 30% in rental vacancies, which is the highest right across Melbourne. So, for tenants out there and landlords, you'll find that the apartments are probably going to struggle the most in this marketplace.
So would you say then that from an investment perspective, you definitely need to get advice before purchasing an apartment, but if it's a lifestyle decision and it fits in with your plan and your personal circumstances, there could be some good purchases out there from an apartment perspective?
Yes, the thing that I would always keep in mind is you want to make sure that you've got that scarcity factor. So whether it be an older style apartment that is only one of 8 or 10 in the block or 12 in the block, they still perform very well. Or whether it be a penthouse or something that's got some X factors, you got the views, Bayside. If a buyer can't just go and buy a cookie cutter version of what you own, then the scarcity factor is there and it will always perform pretty well and have a market. But if it's just a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment and they can go and buy the cheaper one, which is just around the corner if they drop their prices, that's the type of apartment you want to avoid.
Great. So scarcity is the thing that you need to keep in the back of your mind. How is the inner suburban market working compared to the outer suburban market at the moment?
Well, the first home buyers market's still performing very well. And I'd expect as we come out of these restrictions and the government start to ramp up their first home buyer incentives and all those types of things to get people spending again, I think that the entry level of the marketplace will perform pretty well. But I think we'll also see a big separation between the desirable suburbs and the not so desirable suburbs, whether it be people moving closer in to spend more time with family and not having to commute and those types of activities, or whether it be the opposite in the lifestyle choice. I know that there's a lot of people that, having been locked up in some smaller houses closer to town and not having the amenities around them, that they're really starting to question the type of lifestyle that they want to have. So I expect that areas like Bayside and a couple of country locations will probably have a bit of a spike post COVID-19, and I'd expect that the blue chip suburbs will perform pretty well, but the middle suburbs might be affected a little bit more.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it sounds like history generally repeats. The good stuff, the good A grade quality will continue to perform well, and the B and C grade stuff might not so much. Ben, one of the questions that I continually get asked and our advisors get asked is, what should we be thinking about when we're selling a home? And also, given the large amounts of loans that we do for people, what should we be thinking about before we go into the process of buying a home?
Sure. Well, if you're thinking of selling a home right now, the important thing which we touched on before is advice around timing. Knowledge is power, and I think before you pull the trigger on anything, you want to make sure that you've got the right advice around when you should be doing it and how you should be doing it, and how much the current restrictions may affect you, or whether potentially later in the year there's going to be a steep increase in the amount of properties that you're going to be competing against, and potentially over the course of the next 2 to 3 months, when stock levels are down, you might be in a better position to capture the marketplace compared to when we're expecting 3 to 4 times more properties on the market come spring. So from the sales side of things, whenever a vendor is looking at choosing an agent, they generally want to know two things. I want to know, what's my property worth and how much is it going to cost me to sell? Unfortunately, too many vendors choose an agent purely based on the answer to those two questions, because maybe agent A thought the property was worth, or told the vendor that property was worth $50,000 or $100,000 more than the competitors, or said, list it with me and I'll do it for 0.5% cheaper. It's very easy to fall into the trap of choosing an agent purely based on the answer to those two questions. The cheapest agent isn't always the best. In fact, more often than not, they're not. And just because an agent says they'll get you $1 million doesn't mean they're going to get it for you. So make sure you're doing your research. Make sure you're choosing an agent not on what they are telling you, but what they can do for you. And where an agent needs to excel in their trade is they need to be good at two things. They need to be good at marketing, and they need to be good at negotiating. That's what you pay an agent to do, being able to get the most amount of buyers through your front door. And then once they've got them there, what's their strategy to be able to get the highest and best price? And they're the things that vendors need to strongly consider when they're putting their property on the market: is who are they going to use? How are they going to do it? And what strategies is their agent going to apply that's going to be better than what the competitors can do?
Really interesting. Is it fair to ask the agent to look at their body of work, particularly in a specific area, or even speak to previous vendors that they've dealt with?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a big part of it. An agent who has demonstrated that they've sold properties within your specific location, that have got the runs on the board, that have got a database of buyers that they can tap into, now more than ever is one of the most important things, because there is less buyer inquiry. So the really good agents at the moment are going back to their databases, they're flushing them out, they're qualifying who's still in the marketplace and who's buying. And there's a lot more deals that are being done off market or quickly in a private sale campaign because of the agent's database.
Yeah, right. And so this is where you and your business spend a lot of your time, is assisting people that are selling their place to find the right agent.
Correct. Yeah, it's all
Great.
part of the criteria that we look at when we're calling them in. So as a typical scenario is a vendor would engage us to assist them in the sale. And we would call in 3 of the best local agents. And these are agents who we've worked with now for nearly 20 years. So we genuinely know who the best operators are. And so we can cut out all of that guesswork. We get them to have a look at the property. We handle the agent appointment process. We get them to then complete a nuts and bolts proposal that gives us all the information that we need, what they think the property's worth, what strategy they're going to apply, what have they sold recently, what's the commission and the costs, and then we can compare apples with apples and assist the vendor to make the right decisions.
Great. And on the buyer's side, obviously the first step from a Rising Tide perspective is to make sure you understand what you can spend and you've got your finance sorted. What should I be doing next if I'm a potential buyer in the Melbourne property market?
Again, research, making sure that you have an understanding as to what the best options are available to you within your price bracket. And I think the future planning is really important. Is that, do you want to buy something that you can develop? Do you want to buy something that's a set and forget that is always going to have good rental income that you don't need to tip too much money into? Will you have the ability to be able to spend money on improvements in the short term? So there's a whole range of things to consider before you make a decision as to what type of investment property works best for you and your personal circumstances. And that's where it's best to talk to your financial advisor, work out not just the next 2 to 3 years, but what does your 10-year plan look like? What does a 20-year plan look like? And when do you plan on buying your next property? All these types of considerations. I guess it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, and one thing that I've learned along the journey is that a poor decision on the property front is generally a very expensive one. And so I'd always live by the measure twice, cut once, and make sure that it fits into the long-term plan. But just to recap, for people on either side of the fence, buyers or sellers, it's do your research, be patient, engage the professionals in your life, be it a buyer or a vendor advocate. And would it be fair to say, mate, that an initial chat with a buyer or a vendor advocate is pretty achievable without people having to fork out a huge amount of cash before making sure it's the right decision for them?
Yep, absolutely. So the first consultation or any call is absolutely without cost from a buying side of things. But the vendor advocacy arm of the business, there's no additional cost for our service. We simply share in the commission charged by the selling agent. So essentially, it's free to our clients. They pay exactly the same commission as they would otherwise.
So that's part of your value proposition to be able to negotiate with them. Now, mate, final question. Just before we came on, I read that the PM, Scott Morrison, has come out and said that it's like they're going to try to get Australia back in business, were his words, by July. Yep. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think that for the real estate industry, and we've been lucky enough that most agents have kept the doors open, and there's been less sellers and there's been less buyers, but there's been a period of hiatus, I guess, but things have ticked over. For the greater economy, it's really important that we get people back to work ASAP. And through this crisis, globally, governments are doing more than they've ever done, tipping in trillions of dollars to ensure that we get through this and people can get back to work and the economy starts to tick over again. So, but even just from the last couple of weeks, seeing the amount of buyers that post-Easter have come back starting to look at property again shows us that there is still a depth of buyers there that when stock levels do come on again, I'm expecting that they're going to be met with just as much demand from buyers.
Yeah, so as consumer confidence rises, there'll be more people at the auctions, there'll be more stock, and therefore hopefully things will continue to improve from maybe a month or two ago when they dropped off.
Yeah, for sure.
Perfect. Well, mate, really appreciate your time. We'll continue to have this conversation a little bit further down the track in a month or two when we see what happens post-COVID. But in the meantime, how do people get a hold of you, Ben?
So you can go to our website, ianreid.com.au, or you can call us on 9430 0000.
Appreciate your time, mate, and good luck at the auctions this weekend.
All right, mate. Cheers.
Cheers, Ben.
No worries. See you.